All right, so today we're going to talk about voting. One of the questions that I want you to ask yourself is voting something that is a right, like you should definitely have the right to vote, or is it a privilege of the government allows certain people to vote? Because that mindset is really something that's going to take us into this video today. So, first, who can vote? In America, you have to be 18 in order to vote. Now, different states, if you're going to vote in a national election, different states can say that, like, say you lived in, I don't know, Arkansas. Arkansas could allow 13-year-olds to vote if they wanted to, or they don't have to have an age at all. Anybody could vote. However, generally, most states say 18 to vote. You also have to be a registered citizen. Now, hopefully you know who this guy is over here. His name is Uncle Sam, and his initials, US, are supposed to be, he represents the United States. So this sign right here, like, are you registered to vote? Because most states do not allow you to vote unless you are registered so that we can prevent voting fraud. And most states also make you do it, register to vote by a certain day. North Carolina used to have a same-day voting registration, but we recently got rid of that. So, in the past, people have been disenfranchised. Now, what exactly does disenfranchise mean? It means that people were not allowed to vote because their voting rights were taken away. So, for example, even though we passed the 15th Amendment and said that African American males could vote, even though they said that in 1870, that's not actually, they weren't really, African American males were not really truly freely allowed to vote until the 1970s. And even then it was still a battle. Another example would be in this cartoon right here where we're talking about, we got disenfranchisement written on a stump, and we've got like a liberty type man. He's got DC written on his hat, and then you've got a whole parade of people marching with their ballot, and it says to their constitutional voting rights. However, here's Washington DC over here, because that's what he represents, would be DC, and he's being disenfranchised. The people who lived in DC were not allowed to vote for their national leaders until we have Amendment 23, which says you can vote in DC. Other people or other things that obstructed voting would include grandfather clause. The grandfather clause came out with the intent to prevent African Americans from voting. So if your grandfather could vote, then you could vote, as long as it was prior to like 1865. Well, prior to 1865, that would only be white males that owned property in most states. So the grandfather clause really restricted a lot of African American males from voting. They also had literacy tests, meaning that you had to take a test in order to vote, and if you were not successful, then you could not vote. And while logically, some people will say today that, well, we should have a test before people vote to ensure that they know what they're doing. We actually used to have these tests, and it restricted people from voting. And it was designed to make it so that certain groups of people weren't able to vote. So, when we can consider that poor people typically did not encourage their children to go and finish school, and so people of low income were less likely to be able to read, and if they couldn't read, then they couldn't pass this test, which means they couldn't vote, which means their situation would never improve because the government's never going to be sitting there helping them. The government's only going to be looking out for those people who can read and write and were successful. Poll taxes were also done. Here's an example right here of a poll tax that had to be paid. That if you're going to go to, it's received from a Mr. White, and if you see it says 1904, and they allow you to fill that in. He's a resident of the ward, which makes me think that we're in Louisiana because they have wards in Louisiana. And look, there it is. For the sum of $1 poll tax for the year of, oh, sorry, that must not be a 4, that's a 1, for 1912 or 1917 for the support of public schools. So they said that when people voted, and they had to pay their poll tax, well, that went to the school system. However, what happens if Mr. White did not have $1? because he was low income. Well, that means he couldn't vote. And it was just a continuous cycle, and it was designed to prevent poor people, and not just poor African Americans, but also anybody who was poor from voting. If poor people didn't vote, then they wouldn't elect their kind in, other low income people, and that means that the government would be run by the rich, voted for by the rich, and that the rich would be all powerful. They would be able to decide all the things. And they would also try to intimidate people. That they would try, follow people, antagonize them, beat them up, threaten to kill them or hurt somebody in their family if they voted. And I'm sure you're thinking, voting is not that serious. However, if we go back 30 or 40 years, it really was that serious. That voting means that you can pick your leaders. And if you can pick your leaders, the people who make laws and make decisions, then that means that those people are going to pick laws that benefit you. And it was incredibly important to rich, white, powerful people to maintain their status quo. And so they would use all of these methods, which all of these are now illegal. We can't do any of these. That to make sure that they would use these methods to get what they wanted, which was to remain in power. So you cannot vote in the state of North Carolina if you're a felon serving a sentence. So once you get out of prison in the state of North Carolina, then you can vote, as long as you're not on probation, like serving your sentence out. But if you're in prison, that right, you forfeited that right, is what they're saying. If you're mentally disabled and if you're under the age of 18. Now, there are people in the United States who are fighting for 16-year-old suffrage rights to make it so 16-year-olds can vote, and maybe they'll one day pass it. Maybe they won't. We'll see. Now, this next step is how do you vote? So I just talked about who could vote and what kind of things were done to people to prevent them from voting, but you one day will be able to vote very soon, and I want you to be able to have the right steps to get there. So first and foremost, you have to register. You can get a form from the DMV, you can go to your library, oftentimes your school will have them there, or you can just go online. If you type in register to vote, you'll find an easy form to fill out. Once you fill it out, you can mail it to the North Carolina Board of Directors, or if you're doing it online, you can merely submit it, and then they're going to send you a voter registration card. Let me show you what this form looks like. So this form, let me start to zoom in right here. It's really quite simple. So are you a citizen? You have to be a citizen. Are you going to be at least 18? And then this form actually was when they were allowing 16-year-olds to register to vote in the state of North Carolina. So your name, if you don't know this, I don't know mine, so that's something that's completely logical not to know. Put your birth date on there, the county of your birth, where were you born, do you have a driver's license, and if you do, put your number right here in this space. And put your address. Have you lived here for more than 30 days? Because they want you to be able to vote for the people who represent that area. If this is the same right here, where you live versus if you have a P.O. box or something. If you don't have a street address, you can draw a map of where you live. You also need to fill out this part right here, as well as are you a Democrat, are you a Republican, or are you unaffiliated, that you don't belong to either one of those. And if you don't pick one, then you're going to be listed as unaffiliated. And if you've already registered, then you would fill out this part right here. Now, if you have not, and most people haven't, when they're filling this form out, then you don't put anything right here. And then you say right here, I promise under the penalty of perjury, which is lying under oath, that I am not lying, that I have filled out all of this correctly, and then you sign it. Now, make sure you're telling the truth on this, but once you sign it and then you mail it in, which is free postage, they'll send you a card back. And let me show you what that looks like. So this right here is one of which a fellow teacher of mine, when she was in college, she registered to vote. So over here we have her mailing address, we have what date she registered to vote, we have which political party she belonged to, which we have blacked out. We have which gender. Now, she was supposed to sign this right here with her signature. And it says what precinct she's in. And we're going to talk about that. And also says, like, these are all the places that she has the right to vote for. And it also tells her polling place. So when she wanted to go vote, which you have to go in person, this is the place that she would go. Now, if there's any changes, then you'd fill out this other side of this. Very simple thing. And then you mail that back in. Really, really easy. All right, so step 2, after you register, go vote. So on election day, you're going to go to your polling place, which that's what I was just showing you over here. That's her polling place. And now that's called your precinct. Some places will call it a ward, just like I was talking about people who can't vote. A precinct is where you go vote. Now, you're going to use an absentee ballot if you're unable to make it to the polls. And what you do is you just go online or you call them, your polling place, and you say that I'm not going to be able to make it. Can you send me one of these? You fill it out, and then you mail it back. And so you never actually have to get out of bed, really, if you really wanted to go vote that badly, which is something you should totally do. And that's what it looks like. It's now, when you go in, you do have to, you get your form from these tables, and then you come over here, and they've already got pencils and pens laid up over there. Now, in the state of North Carolina, you slide it into an electronic grader, if you will. It's not really a grading thing, but however, it acknowledges your vote. That way you have a paper copy and an electronic copy, and then you get your sticker, and then you put that on Snapchat, and then you walk out. It's really that simple. Well, let me explain where it could get a little complicated. This is really not that complicated, though. It's just some terms. So whenever you're filling out your ballot, there's 2 different ways you could do it. You could do a split ticket, or you could do a straight ticket. A straight ticket is when you say, I belong to fill in blank for political party. If you belong to the purple party, then you're going to say, if you can fill out a little bubble, it says, vote for all the candidates of the purple party. Well, what if you don't want to do that, though? What if you've been watching all the commercials and you've been looking at the candidates, and you really like perhaps the yellow party for governor, but then you like the orange party for president? And then you could do a split ticket. A split ticket is when you're going to vote for candidates from different parties. So here is a sample ballot right here, and when I zoom in, it says up here. So it explains you got to fill in the circles. So you can't do it. You got to decide, are you going to vote for this person, these group of people? Remember, we have the 12th Amendment, which says you have 2 people running on 1 ticket. So we have the Democrats, we have Republicans, and we have the Libertarians. Now, you can write somebody, you can write my mom on here. However, it is kind of silly to do that because it's a wasted vote unless everybody gets together and you all agree that you're going to write an official name in. But you have to have some planning going on. So right here it explains what a straight party is. So it's really not all that complicated. It tells you what it is. And it says if you want to vote a straight ticket, you can go ahead and you can bubble in Democratic, Republican, or Libertarian. And once you bubble that in, if you decide to bubble this in, then you're done. So you seriously bubbled in 2 bubbles and you're done. However, if you want to go through this line by line and sit there and say, I like Daryl for this one, I like Eric for this one, Pat McCrory was amazing here, Dan Forrest because he sounds like Forrest Gump, and you could keep going. Now, some people, you can see where there's only one person running for each individual spot. And so all of these spots are different offices that we elect in the state of North Carolina, or for their particular district, because they're different per district that you live in. And so you pick which district that you would have. And it's really, really that simple. Now here we have an infographic, and I really want to make sure that you understand when we're looking at this. Women tend to vote more than men. When we look at this, whites tend to vote more than the other major groups in the country. This red circle right here, that young people vote the least, which is terrible because that's a habit you're getting for a lifetime. And it tends to be older people tend to vote the most. So our groups between 55 and 74 tend to vote the most, and then we got people who are probably have a harder time getting out maybe. Married people vote the most, and people who are single vote the least. Rich people vote more. So the more money you make, the more likely you are to vote. Almost all wealthy people vote. And so I wonder what that says for our political system. People who are making less than 20,000, so this is going to be people who are working minimum wage jobs, are going, for the most part, are going to, only about half of those people vote. The state that has the highest percentage of voting would be Minnesota. Apparently, Minnesotans, out of 4 people, 3 of them are definitely going to go to the polls. However, in Hawaii, only 1 out of 2. So it's not nearly as good. Now, there's a reason for that completely. Now, what these people are doing, I don't know if it's just cold or whatever, because most of these places are cold that have the highest voting. But in Hawaii, by the time Hawaii gets to vote, and they don't have very much power in the election, but by the time they get to vote, the election's already pretty much decided, so they might feel a little ineffective. If it comes to education, the more education you have, the more likely you are to vote. People who only have a high school degree, who are single, who make not very much money, who are young, males, and Asian are way less likely to vote. And the people who have a job are more likely to vote than not. Now, why do people not vote? Well, mostly they just say they're busy, and that's it. Of course, you also have people who are like, oh, I don't like either candidate, which is a silly reason not to vote, because one of those candidates is going to be telling you what to do. So you better get out there and pick one. All right, so that's all we have for today.